have any experience in that. You have the most important experience there is. You know what it's like to struggle. You know what real help looks like. He offered her a salary that was more than she'd made in her previous job, plus benefits and opportunities for advancement. What about Annie? Rebecca asked. I talked to Dr. Chen. She knows the director of nursing at Community College of Denver. They have a program for students who need financial assistance. Annie's eyes widened. I always wanted to be a nurse, but I never thought I could afford school. Now you can, James said simply. We'll cover your tuition and living expenses. Rebecca felt overwhelmed. This is too much. We can't accept all this. You can and you will, Margaret said firmly, arriving with Elizabeth in her arms. Look at our daughter. She's healthy and happy because you cared for her. Now let us care for you. Elizabeth gurgled and reached toward Annie, who couldn't help but smile and take her tiny hand. She remembers you, Margaret said softly. You'll always be part of her story. That afternoon, Rebecca found herself signing employment papers at Morrison Industries while Annie enrolled in nursing school. The speed of it all felt surreal. Are you sure about this? Rebecca asked James as they toured the facility. I've built my success on reading people, he said. You two have something money can't buy, genuine hearts and the courage to do what's right even when it's hard. The other employees welcomed Rebecca warmly, especially when they learned how she'd found the Morrisons' daughter. Word spread quickly through the company, and by the end of her first day, she'd received dozens of offers of help and friendship. This is your office, James said, showing her a space with windows overlooking downtown Denver. Your job is to find ways for our company to help people like you, people who need a second chance. As she stood at the window looking out over the city where she'd been homeless just days before, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. That night, in their comfortable guest house, the sisters sat together processing the day's events. Do you think we deserve this? Annie asked. I think Elizabeth deserved to be rescued, and we did that. Maybe good things happen to people who do good things. Margaret says we can stay here as long as we need to. Rebecca nodded. Until you finish nursing school. Until we're really back on our feet. They sat in comfortable silence, both thinking about how quickly their lives had changed. 3 days ago, they were searching through dumpsters for food. Now they had jobs, school, a safe place to live, and something more valuable than any of that, a family who truly cared about them. Rebecca. Annie said softly. What? I think we're going to be okay. For the first time in 2 years, Rebecca believed that was true. Rebecca's first week at Morrison Industries taught her more about business than she'd ever imagined. Her job was to identify Denver families and individuals who needed help, then connect them with resources through the company's community outreach program. Start with what you know, James advised during their Monday morning meeting. What kind of help would have made a difference when you were struggling? Rebecca thought about the cold nights, the constant hunger, the humiliation of being invisible to most people. Basic needs first. Food, shelter, medical care. But also dignity. People need to feel like they matter. Her first initiative was partnering with 3 downtown restaurants to provide regular meals for homeless individuals. Instead of handouts, she created a voucher system that allowed people to order from menus like regular customers. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, she explained to the restaurant owners. A hot meal served at a table means more than food handed through a window. The program was an immediate success. Tony's Italian Kitchen, where she and Annie had been searching dumpsters just weeks before, became the first partner location. I remember you, Carol the waitress, said when Rebecca returned to sign the contract. You look different now. I feel different. But I haven't forgotten where I came from. Meanwhile, Annie was thriving in nursing school. Her instructors were impressed by her natural compassion and dedication to her studies. She has a gift, Dr. Chen told Margaret during one of their regular check-ins. Many students have the technical skills, but Annie understands suffering in a way that makes her exceptional. Annie's favorite rotation was pediatrics, where her experience caring for Elizabeth served her well. She had a natural way with children that both patients and parents responded to immediately. I think I found my calling, she told Rebecca one evening. I want to work with sick children and their families. The sisters had settled into a routine at the Morrison house. They still lived in the guest house, but they often joined the family for dinner. Elizabeth, now 6 months old, had become attached to both sisters, reaching for them whenever they entered a room. "She's going to think you're her big sisters," Margaret laughed as Elizabeth babbled happily in Annie's arms. "We'd be honored," Rebecca replied, and she meant it. James had become something of a mentor to Rebecca, teaching her about business operations and community engagement. "The key to sustainable charity is creating programs that help people help themselves," he explained. Under Rebecca's guidance, Morrison Industries launched 3 new initiatives: a job training program for formerly homeless individuals, a microfinance program for small business startups, and a partnership with local schools to provide supplies for children from low-income families. "You've accomplished more in 2 months than our previous community coordinator did in 2 years, James told her during her quarterly review. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," Rebecca replied. "That's exactly why you're so effective. You see needs instead of problems." The transformation wasn't just professional. Both sisters were healing emotionally from their years on the streets. Regular meals, safe housing, and meaningful work had restored not just their physical health, but their sense of self-worth. "I forgot what it felt like to wake up without fear," Annie confided to Margaret one afternoon. "Fear is a way of becoming a habit," Margaret replied. "The trick is replacing it with better habits." Margaret had become a surrogate mother to both sisters, something they hadn't expected but desperately needed. She helped Annie with her school applications, celebrated Rebecca's work successes, and simply provided the emotional support they'd been missing for years. "You gave us back our daughter," she told them. "Now let us give you back your lives." The sisters also began giving back to the homeless community they'd left behind. Every weekend, they volunteered at shelters and soup kitchens, but with a different perspective now. "We're not just serving food," Rebecca explained to new volunteers. "We're serving hope. Every person we help could be someone's miracle waiting to happen." One Saturday, they encountered a young mother with 2 small children who reminded them of their own desperate days. Instead of just providing a meal, Rebecca connected her with Morrison Industries' Housing Assistance Program. "Why are you helping me?" the woman asked. "Because someone helped us when we needed it most," Annie replied. "That's how kindness works. It keeps moving forward." 3 months after finding Elizabeth, both sisters were thriving in ways they'd never imagined possible. Rebecca had been promoted to Director of Community Outreach, and Annie was at the top of her nursing class. "Do you ever miss it?" Annie asked one evening, looking out at the city lights from their comfortable guest house. "Miss being homeless? No. But I miss the simplicity sometimes. When survival is your only goal, life is complicated but clear." "And now?" Rebecca smiled. "Now we get to help other people survive and thrive. I think that's better than simple." As Elizabeth took her first steps that week, moving between Annie's outstretched arms and Margaret's, Rebecca realized they'd all taken first steps together, toward a future none of them could have imagined just months before. 6 months after finding Elizabeth, Rebecca stood before the Denver City Council presenting Morrison Industries' latest community initiative, Second Chances Denver, a comprehensive program to help homeless families transition to stable housing and employment. "This isn't just charity," Rebecca explained to the council members. "This is investment in our community's future. When we help families stabilize, we strengthen our entire city." The program had grown from Rebecca's initial restaurant partnerships into a citywide network involving dozens of businesses, 3 hospitals, and multiple educational institutions. Councilwoman Patricia Hughes leaned forward with interest. "Ms. Patterson, what makes you confident this approach will work?" "Because I lived it," Rebecca replied simply. 6 months ago, my sister and I were homeless. Today, she's training to be a pediatric nurse, and I'm running programs that have helped over 200 families find stable housing. The room fell silent. Rebecca had learned that her story carried power, not just to inspire, but to educate people about the reality of homelessness. "The difference between success and failure isn't character or determination," she continued. "It's opportunity. Everyone deserves a second chance." The council approved Morrison Industries' proposal unanimously, along with city funding to expand the program. That evening, Margaret hosted a celebration dinner at the Morrison house. The dining room was filled with people whose lives had been touched by Rebecca's programs, former clients who now had jobs, apartments, and hope for the future. "I want to make a toast," James said, raising his glass. "To Rebecca and Annie, who taught us that helping others isn't just good for them, it's good for everyone." Annie blushed as everyone applauded. She was now in her second semester of nursing school and had just been accepted into the pediatric specialty program. "I have an announcement too," Annie said. "Dr. Chen offered me a position at Children's Hospital Denver after graduation. I'll be working with families whose children have chronic illnesses." The room erupted in cheers. Elizabeth, now pulling herself up on furniture and babbling constantly, seemed to clap along with everyone else. "She's going to grow up thinking the whole world celebrates everything," Margaret laughed, scooping up her daughter. After dinner, Rebecca found herself on the back patio with James, looking out over the city lights. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but finding Elizabeth was the best thing that ever happened to us," Rebecca said. "She was lucky you found her," James replied. "We were all lucky. Your family could have just taken her back and forgotten about us. Instead, you changed our lives." James was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? That night Elizabeth went missing, I prayed too. Not just for her safety, but for a sign that there was still good in the world." He paused, watching his daughter through the window as Margaret prepared her for bed. "You and Annie were that sign. You proved that even when people have nothing, they can still choose kindness. That gave me back my faith in humanity." The conversation was interrupted by Annie bursting through the patio door, her phone in her hand. "Rebecca, you have to see this," she said excitedly. She showed them a local news article titled "From Homeless to Helping, Denver Woman Creates Program That's Changing Lives." "They want to interview you for the morning show," Annie said. Rebecca felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of attention." "You are," Margaret said, joining them on the patio with Elizabeth in her arms. "Your story gives people hope, and hope is what the world needs more of." The next morning, Rebecca found herself in a television studio, more nervous than she'd been since that first day at Morrison Industries. "Tell us about the moment your life changed," the interviewer asked. "My life changed the moment we decided we couldn't walk away from a baby who needed help," Rebecca replied. "But it really changed when the Morrison family decided they couldn't walk away from us." She talked about the program's success, the families they'd helped, and the businesses that had joined their network of support. "What's next for Second Chances Denver?" the interviewer asked. "We're launching a mentorship program where people who've graduated from our services help newcomers. The best help comes from people who've been where you are." After the interview, Rebecca's phone rang constantly with calls from other cities wanting to replicate their program. By the end of the week, she'd received inquiries from Phoenix, Portland, and Nashville. "You're going to be famous," Annie teased that weekend as they volunteered at their usual soup kitchen. "I don't want to be famous. I just want to help people." But Rebecca was beginning to understand that sometimes helping people meant accepting attention and opportunities that felt uncomfortable. Her story was becoming bigger than her personal comfort zone. That Sunday, at Elizabeth's first birthday party, Rebecca looked around the backyard filled with friends, colleagues, former clients, and the Morrison family. A year ago, she and Annie had been invisible, forgotten members of society. Now they were at the center of a community built on kindness and second chances. "Make a wish, Elizabeth," Margaret said as they brought out the birthday cake. Elizabeth clapped her hands and babbled, then reached toward Rebecca and Annie with the same trust she'd shown them that first night in the dumpster. "I think she already got her wish," Annie said, taking Elizabeth into her arms. "This isn't just charity," Rebecca explained to the council members. "This is investment in our community's future. When we help families stabilize, we strengthen our entire city." The program had grown from Rebecca's initial restaurant partnerships into a citywide network involving dozens of businesses, 3 hospitals, and multiple educational institutions. Councilwoman Patricia Hughes leaned forward with interest. "Ms. Patterson, what makes you confident this approach will work?" "Because I lived it," Rebecca replied simply. 6 months ago, my sister and I were homeless. Today, she's training to be a pediatric nurse, and I'm running programs that have helped over 200 families find stable housing. The room fell silent. Rebecca had learned that her story carried power, not just to inspire, but to educate people about the reality of homelessness. The difference between success and failure isn't character or determination, she continued. It's opportunity. Everyone deserves a second chance. The council approved Morrison Industries' proposal unanimously, along with city funding to expand the program. That evening, Margaret hosted a celebration dinner at the Morrison house. The dining room was filled with people whose lives had been touched by Rebecca's programs, former clients who now had jobs, apartments, and hope for the future. "I want to make a toast," James said, raising his glass. "To Rebecca and Annie, who taught us that helping others isn't just good for them, it's good for everyone." Annie blushed as everyone applauded. She was now in her second semester of nursing school and had just been accepted into the pediatric specialty program. "I have an announcement too," Annie said. "Dr. Chen offered me a position at Children's Hospital Denver after graduation. I'll be working with families whose children have chronic illnesses." The room erupted in cheers. Elizabeth, now pulling herself up on furniture and babbling constantly, seemed to clap along with everyone else. "She's going to grow up thinking the whole world celebrates everything," Margaret laughed, scooping up her daughter. After dinner, Rebecca found herself on the back patio with James, looking out over the city lights. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but finding Elizabeth was the best thing that ever happened to us," Rebecca said. "She was lucky you found her," James replied. "We were all lucky. Your family could have just taken her back and forgotten about us. Instead, you changed our lives." James was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? That night Elizabeth went missing, I prayed too. Not just for her safety, but for a sign that there was still good in the world." He paused, watching his daughter through the window as Margaret prepared her for bed. "You and Annie were that sign. You proved that even when people have nothing, they can still choose kindness. That gave me back my faith in humanity." The conversation was interrupted by Annie bursting through the patio door, her phone in her hand. "Rebecca, you have to see this," she said excitedly. She showed them a local news article titled "From Homeless to Helping, Denver Woman Creates Program That's Changing Lives." "They want to interview you for the morning show," Annie said. Rebecca felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of attention." "You are," Margaret said, joining them on the patio with Elizabeth in her arms. "Your story gives people hope, and hope is what the world needs more of." The next morning, Rebecca found herself in a television studio, more nervous than she'd been since that first day at Morrison Industries. "Tell us about the moment your life changed," the interviewer asked. "My life changed the moment we decided we couldn't walk away from a baby who needed help," Rebecca replied. "But it really changed when the Morrison family decided they couldn't walk away from us." She talked about the program's success, the families they'd helped, and the businesses that had joined their network of support. "What's next for Second Chances Denver?" the interviewer asked. "We're launching a mentorship program where people who've graduated from our services help newcomers. The best help comes from people who've been where you are." After the interview, Rebecca's phone rang constantly with calls from other cities wanting to replicate their program. By the end of the week, she'd received inquiries from Phoenix, Portland, and Nashville. "You're going to be famous," Annie teased that weekend as they volunteered at their usual soup kitchen. "I don't want to be famous. I just want to help people." But Rebecca was beginning to understand that sometimes helping people meant accepting attention and opportunities that felt uncomfortable. Her story was becoming bigger than her personal comfort zone. That Sunday, at Elizabeth's first birthday party, Rebecca looked around the backyard filled with friends, colleagues, former clients, and the Morrison family. A year ago, she and Annie had been invisible, forgotten members of society. Now they were at the center of a community built on kindness and second chances. "Make a wish, Elizabeth," Margaret said as they brought out the birthday cake. Elizabeth clapped her hands and babbled, then reached toward Rebecca and Annie with the same trust she'd shown them that first night in the dumpster. "I think she already got her wish," Annie said, taking Elizabeth into her arms. Rebecca realized they all had. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest acts of kindness, and sometimes finding someone else's miracle helps you find your own. Elizabeth's first birthday marked a year since Rebecca and Annie had found her, and the celebration reflected how much all their lives had changed. The backyard party included not just the Morrison family and the sisters, but dozens of people whose lives had been touched by their story. Maria Santos, one of the first families helped by Second Chances Denver, brought her twin boys who were now thriving in elementary school. Miss Rebecca saved our family, she told everyone who would listen. David Kim, who had found work through the job training program, arrived with his wife and newborn daughter. We named her Hope, he announced, because that's what you gave us. Rebecca watched the children playing on the elaborate playground James had built for Elizabeth, thinking about how different this scene was from the desperate night they'd pulled a crying baby from a dumpster. "Penny for your thoughts," Margaret said, joining her at the picnic table. "I was just thinking about that night. We were so scared, so desperate. We had no idea we were about to become part of something amazing." Margaret smiled. Elizabeth's adoption papers came through last week. Adoption papers. "We want to make you and Annie her official godmothers. Legal guardians if anything ever happens to James and me." Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. "Margaret, that's what family does. You saved our daughter's life. Now we want you to be part of her life forever." The legal ceremony took place the following month at the Morrison family attorney's office. Elizabeth, now walking unsteadily but with great determination, kept trying to grab the important papers while the lawyers explained the arrangements. "She's going to be trouble," Annie laughed, chasing Elizabeth around the conference room. "The best kind of trouble," James agreed. That afternoon, Rebecca received a call that would change everything again. The mayor of Denver wanted to meet with her about expanding Second Chances Denver into a citywide department. "They want to offer you the position of Director of Homeless Services for the entire city," James explained after Rebecca shared the news. "But I love working at Morrison Industries. And we love having you. But this is your chance to help hundreds more families. Maybe thousands." The decision wasn't easy. Morrison Industries had become home, and James and Margaret felt like family. But the opportunity to create systemic change was too important to ignore. "Take the job," Annie urged. "I'll be starting my position at Children's Hospital soon. We're both ready for the next step." "What about living here? This has been our home for over a year." Margaret's response was immediate. "This will always be your home. But it's time for you to have your own homes too." The sisters found a duplex in a neighborhood between downtown Denver and Cherry Hills Village, close enough to stay involved in Elizabeth's life, but independent enough to build their own futures. Rebecca's new position came with a substantial salary increase and a staff of 12 people. Her first initiative was expanding the mentorship program citywide. "The most powerful voice for someone who's homeless is someone who used to be homeless," she explained to her new team. Annie graduated nursing school with highest honors and immediately began working in the pediatric intensive care unit at Children's Hospital. Her first week, she saved the life of a premature baby by noticing subtle changes in his breathing patterns that others had missed. "You have exceptional intuition with infants," Dr. Chen observed. "It's like you understand what they need before they can tell you." "I learned from the best teacher," Annie replied, thinking of Elizabeth. Both sisters had found their calling, but their bond with the Morrison family remained strong. They still joined for Sunday dinners, and Elizabeth spent one weekend a month at their duplex, which they decorated with a special room just for her. "Becca, Annie." Elizabeth would squeal whenever she saw them, running on her toddler legs toward their outstretched arms. "She's going to grow up thinking it's normal to have 4 parents," Margaret said one evening as they watched Elizabeth playing with both sisters. "Maybe that's not a bad thing," James replied. "The more people who love a child, the better." Rebecca's work with the city was gaining national attention. She'd been invited to speak at conferences in San Francisco, Boston, and Atlanta about Denver's innovative approach to homelessness. "I never imagined I'd be traveling the country talking about helping people," she told Annie as she packed for another speaking engagement. "You're giving other cities hope that they can solve this problem too. That's pretty amazing." But the travel was taking its toll. Rebecca missed the direct contact with families that had made her work at Morrison Industries so fulfilling. "I feel like I'm losing touch with why I started doing this work," she confided to Margaret one Sunday. "Then maybe it's time to remember," Margaret suggested. That week, Rebecca spent 3 days back on the streets with the outreach teams, talking to people still living in the situations she and Annie had escaped. Ms. Patterson, a young woman named Crystal, said, "I heard about your program on the news. Is it real? Can you really help people like us?" Looking into Crystal's eyes, Rebecca saw herself from 2 years ago, desperate, scared, but still hoping for a miracle. "It's real," Rebecca said. "And yes, we can help. But first, tell me what you need most right now." That conversation reminded Rebecca why she'd taken the job. Every policy decision, every program expansion, every budget meeting was ultimately about that moment when someone who had given up on themselves learned to hope again. Have you ever wondered how one act of kindness can ripple outward to change an entire community? This story shows the incredible power of paying it forward. Subscribe to see how these bonds continue to transform lives. 2 years after finding Elizabeth, Rebecca faced the biggest challenge of her career. Denver was experiencing an economic downturn that threatened funding for all social services, including Second Chances Denver. "The city council wants to cut our budget by 40%, Rebecca announced to her staff during their weekly meeting. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. Hundreds of families who were counting on help would be left without resources. "What are our options?" asked Marcus Thompson, Rebecca's deputy director, who had once been homeless himself. "We find new funding sources, or we figure out how to help more people with less money." That evening, Rebecca sat in her duplex, staring at spreadsheets and budget projections. The numbers weren't encouraging, no matter how she arranged them. Annie found her there at midnight, still trying to make the math work. "You can't solve this alone," Annie said gently. "If I can't figure this out, families are going to end up back on the streets. People like Crystal, like the Santos family, they're counting on us." "Then let's ask for help. That's what you taught me. Sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places." The next morning, Rebecca called an emergency meeting with James Morrison. She laid out the situation honestly, explaining how the budget cuts would affect their programs. "How much do you need?" James asked without hesitation. "James, I can't ask Morrison Industries to cover what the city won't fund." "You're not asking. I'm offering." "How much?" Rebecca's throat tightened. $2 million to maintain current services for 1 year. James was quiet for a long moment, then picked up his phone. "Margaret, can you come to my office? And bring Elizabeth if she's with you." When Margaret arrived with Elizabeth, now an energetic 2-year-old, James explained the situation. "We have the money," Margaret said immediately. "But maybe we can do something even better." Her idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of Morrison Industries funding the program alone, they would host a fundraising gala, bringing together every business and individual who had benefited from Second Chances Denver. "Let the community save the program," Margaret suggested. "Show the city council how much people value what you've built." The planning took 6 weeks, and Rebecca was amazed by the response. Maria Santos volunteered to cater the event with her food truck business, which had grown from a single cart to a fleet of 5 trucks. David Kim's construction company donated labor to transform the Morrison Industries warehouse into an elegant venue. "This is what community looks like," Annie said as they watched dozens of volunteers setting up tables and decorations. The night of the gala, Rebecca stood before 300 people who had gathered to support the program. Former clients sat at tables with business executives, city council members shared dessert with current program participants, and children who had been homeless were now running around in their best clothes, playing with kids from some of Denver's wealthiest families. 2 years ago, Rebecca began her speech, "My sister and I were searching through a dumpster for food when we found a crying baby. That moment changed all our lives, but not just ours. It started a ripple effect that has touched hundreds of families." She gestured toward the crowd. "Everyone in this room is connected by kindness. Some of you received help, some of you gave help, and some of you did both. Tonight, we're proving that when a community comes together, there's no challenge we can't overcome." Elizabeth, sitting in Margaret's lap at the head table, clapped enthusiastically even though she didn't understand the words. Her presence reminded everyone why they were there. By the end of the evening, they had raised $4 million, enough to fund the program for 2 full years and expand services to other Colorado cities. I can't believe this, Rebecca said as the final donations were tallied. I can, said Dr. Chen, who had attended with her family. You planted seeds of kindness, and now you're harvesting the results. The success of the fundraiser caught the attention of federal officials, and within 6 months, Rebecca was invited to Washington, D.C. to advise on national homeless policy. They want to use Denver as a model for the entire country, she told Annie excitedly. That's incredible. But are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility? Rebecca thought about Crystal, who was now managing a small apartment complex through the program. About Maria Santos, whose food trucks were providing jobs for other formerly homeless individuals. About all the families who had found stability and hope through Second Chances Denver. I'm scared, she admitted. But I think scared and ready can be the same thing sometimes. Annie's work at Children's Hospital was also evolving. She had developed a specialty in working with families of sick children, helping them navigate not just medical challenges but also financial and emotional struggles. I've learned that healing isn't just about medicine, she told Rebecca. It's about hope, support, and knowing someone cares about you. Her supervisor had nominated her for the hospital's Outstanding Nurse Award, recognizing her innovative approach to family-centered care. Elizabeth taught me that babies know when they are loved and safe, Annie explained to the awards committee. That knowledge guides everything I do with young patients. Both sisters were thriving professionally, but their greatest joy remained their relationship with Elizabeth and the Morrison family. Elizabeth was now talking in full sentences, and her favorite phrase was help people like Becca and Annie. She's going to grow up thinking everyone spends their time helping others, Margaret laughed. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Rebecca replied. The world could use more people who think helping others is normal. As they celebrated Elizabeth's second birthday, surrounded by the community they had helped build, Rebecca reflected on how far they'd all come. 2 years ago, she and Annie had been invisible members of society. Now they were leaders, mentors, and most importantly, they were family to a little girl who would grow up knowing that kindness was the most powerful force in the world. 3 years after finding Elizabeth in that Denver dumpster, Rebecca stood on a stage at the National Conference on Homelessness in Washington, D.C., addressing over 2,000 delegates from across the country. The solution to homelessness isn't complicated, she told the audience. It requires 3 things: immediate assistance, long-term support, and the belief that every person has value and potential. In the audience, Annie sat with Margaret, James, and Elizabeth, who was now 3 years old and insisted on wearing her fancy dress to support Aunt Becca's big speech. She's talking about us, Elizabeth whispered loudly, making everyone around them smile. Rebecca's presentation showcased Denver's success, a 60% reduction in street homelessness, over 1,200 families transitioned to stable housing, and a program that had been replicated in 15 other cities. But statistics don't tell the whole story, Rebecca continued. The real measure of success is in individual lives transformed. Like Maria Santos, who went from living in her car with 2 children to owning 5 food trucks and employing 12 people. She clicked to the next slide, showing a photo of the Santos family at their newest restaurant opening. Or David Kim, who used construction skills learned in our job training program to start his own company, which now builds affordable housing for other families transitioning from homelessness. The audience applauded, but Rebecca wasn't finished. Or Annie Patterson, my sister, who became a pediatric nurse and now runs the family support program at Children's Hospital Denver, helping families navigate medical crises without losing their homes. She paused, looking directly at Annie in the audience. Annie taught me that the most powerful qualification for helping others is having needed help yourself. After the presentation, Rebecca was surrounded by mayors, policy directors, and non-profit leaders all wanting to implement Denver's model in their cities. Ms. Patterson, said the mayor of Nashville, would you consider consulting on our homeless initiatives? We've had limited success with traditional approaches. I'd be honored, Rebecca replied, but I should warn you, our approach requires community buy-in at every level. It only works when everyone participates. The conference led to consulting contracts with 6 cities and an offer Rebecca hadn't expected, Director of National Homeless Policy for the federal government. They want me to move to Washington, she told Annie that evening as they walked through the hotel lobby. That's incredible. You could influence policy for the entire country. But it would mean leaving Denver. Leaving Elizabeth and the Morrison family. Leaving the community we've built. Annie was quiet for a moment. What does your heart tell you? That I've learned the difference between helping people and helping policy. Policy is important, but people are what matter. That night, Rebecca made her decision. She would consult with other cities, travel to speak and train, but her base would remain in Denver. The personal relationships and community connections were too valuable to abandon for career advancement. Back home, Elizabeth had learned a new word, conference. Did you tell everyone about helping people at your conference? She asked Rebecca seriously. I did. And you know what? They all want to learn how to help people like we do in Denver. Good. Elizabeth nodded. Everyone should help people. Margaret laughed. She's going to be trouble when she gets older. The kind of trouble that changes the world. Rebecca's decision to stay in Denver allowed her to focus on what had made her work most effective, direct engagement with people who needed help. She restructured her role with the city, spending half her time on policy and administration, and half working directly with families in the programs. I never want to lose touch with why we do this work, she explained to her staff. Annie's career was also reaching new heights. She had completed additional training in family counseling and was developing a program to help families stay together during medical crises. I learned from Elizabeth that babies need stability and love to thrive, she told her supervisor. The same is true for sick children and their families. Her program, called Keeping Families Strong, provided temporary housing for families whose children required long-term hospitalization, along with counseling and financial support. You're creating a model that could help families nationwide, Dr. Chen observed. Both sisters were building on the lessons they'd learned from their own experience and from the Morrison family's generosity. Their programs emphasized dignity, respect, and the belief that everyone deserved a second chance. The third anniversary of finding Elizabeth was marked not with a private celebration, but with a community festival in downtown Denver. Second Chances Day had become an annual event celebrating the city's progress in addressing homelessness. 3 years ago, my sister and I found a baby in a dumpster, Rebecca told the crowd of over 5,000 people. Today, that baby is here with us, healthy and loved, surrounded by a community that proves kindness is contagious. Elizabeth, now confident on stage, took the microphone. Thank you for helping people, she said in her clear 3-year-old voice. Becca and Annie taught me that helping is good. The crowd erupted in applause, and Rebecca felt a profound sense of completion. They had taken their worst moment, being so desperate they were searching through garbage, and transformed it into a movement that was helping thousands of people. We've come full circle, Annie said as they watched Elizabeth play with children from families they'd helped. No, Rebecca replied, watching Maria Santos serve food from her trucks, while David Kim's company provided information about affordable housing. We've started a circle that will keep growing. That evening, at the traditional family dinner at the Morrison house, James raised his glass for a toast. To Rebecca and Annie, who taught us that finding someone's miracle can help you find your own. Elizabeth climbed onto Rebecca's lap. What's a miracle? You are, Rebecca replied simply. You're our miracle, and we hope we're yours. Looking around the table at the family they'd found by doing the right thing in a desperate moment, Rebecca understood that the best miracles are the ones you create by helping others. 5 years after that life-changing night in the dumpster, Rebecca stood in the backyard of a beautiful house in Denver's Highlands neighborhood, watching Elizabeth play with a group of children whose families had all been helped by Second Chances Denver. Aunt Rebecca, Elizabeth called out, now 5 years old and full of confidence. Tommy says his family used to live in their car. Is that true? Yes, sweetheart, but look at them now. They have a house, and Tommy's mom works at the hospital with Aunt Annie. Elizabeth nodded solemnly, then ran back to her friends. At 5, she understood that helping people was what adults did, and she had announced her intention to be a helper person when she grew up. The backyard belonged to Rebecca and Annie, who had bought the house together 2 years earlier. It was large enough for them each to have their own space, with a special bedroom decorated just for Elizabeth's frequent sleepovers. 5 years, Annie mused, joining Rebecca on the deck. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if we hadn't found her? Annie considered this. I think we would have found our way eventually, but maybe not to such an amazing place. The sisters had indeed found their way to an amazing place. Rebecca now directed homeless services for the entire state of Colorado, with her programs being studied and replicated across the nation. She traveled frequently, but never for more than a week at a time. Elizabeth and the Morrison family were too important to her. Annie had become the head of pediatric family services at Children's Hospital, and had just been accepted to a doctoral program to further develop her expertise in family-centered care. Dr. Annie, Elizabeth liked to say, that sounds important. Everything you do is important when you're helping people, Annie would reply. Their success had brought opportunities neither had imagined. Rebecca had written a book, Finding Grace, How One Baby Changed a City, with proceeds funding scholarships for formerly homeless students. Annie had developed training programs that were being used in children's hospitals nationwide. But their greatest accomplishment remained their relationship with Elizabeth and the Morrison family. Girls, Margaret called from the kitchen window, dinner's ready. The Sunday dinner tradition had moved to Rebecca and Annie's house once they'd gotten settled. The sisters enjoyed hosting, and Elizabeth loved having two houses with family. Did I tell you about the call from Phoenix? Rebecca asked as they gathered around the dinner table. Another city wanting to replicate our model. James asked. The mayor wants me to come for a month to help them launch their program. They are offering to cover all expenses and pay me as a consultant. That's wonderful, Margaret said. You should go. But it's a month. I'd miss Elizabeth's school play. Elizabeth's eyes went wide. You can't miss my play. I'm going to be a tree. An important tree, Annie added solemnly. The most important tree in the whole forest, Elizabeth declared. Rebecca laughed. Then I guess I'll have to tell Phoenix they need to wait until after the school play. Or, James suggested, you could take Elizabeth and Margaret with you. Make it a family consulting trip. Margaret's face lit up. That's actually brilliant. Elizabeth could see how the work she inspired is spreading to other cities. And I could help with the children's programs, Elizabeth added importantly. The conversation reflected how intertwined their lives had become. Elizabeth truly had 4 parents now, Margaret and James providing stability and traditional family structure, while Rebecca and Annie offered perspective on overcoming challenges and helping others. Later that evening, after the Morrisons had gone home, Rebecca and Annie sat on their deck looking out over the Denver skyline. Do you think we've done enough? Annie asked. Made enough of a difference? Rebecca considered the question seriously. I think about all the families who have homes now because we found Elizabeth. All the children who won't grow up homeless. All the people who learned that their lives have value. But there are still people on the streets. Still families struggling. There always will be. But there are also hundreds of people working to help them now. People who understand that homelessness isn't a character flaw. It's a situation that can be changed. Annie nodded. Elizabeth is going to grow up in a world where helping others is normal. Where second chances are expected, not exceptional. That might be the most important thing we've accomplished. The next weekend was Elizabeth's 5th birthday party, held at the Morrison house with over 100 guests. The backyard was filled with families from every part of Denver's community, former clients, current staff members, business partners, and city officials, all celebrating together. Make a wish, Elizabeth, Margaret said as they brought out the elaborate princess castle cake. Elizabeth closed her eyes tight, made her wish, then blew out all 5 candles with one breath. What did you wish for? Annie asked. I wish that everyone would have a family like mine, Elizabeth said simply. Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. At 5 years old, Elizabeth already understood that the greatest gift wasn't material wealth or even safety. It was being surrounded by people who loved you unconditionally. That's the best wish I've ever heard, Rebecca said, hugging Elizabeth close. Will it come true? Rebecca looked around the backyard at the community they'd built through kindness and second chances. I think it already is coming true. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Elizabeth fell asleep in Rebecca's arms, exhausted from excitement and sugar. She's gotten so big, Margaret said softly, smoothing her daughter's hair. But she hasn't changed, Annie observed. She still believes the best about everyone. That's because she's surrounded by people who choose to be their best selves, James added. Rebecca carried Elizabeth inside and tucked her into the bed that would always be Hayes in the Morrison house. As she kissed her good night, Elizabeth's eyes fluttered open. Aunt Rebecca. Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for letting us find you. Elizabeth smiled and drifted back to sleep, secure in the love of her extended family. Outside, Rebecca rejoined the others on the patio, looking up at the stars over Denver. 5 years ago, we were 3 broken people, she said quietly. You had lost your daughter, and we had lost hope. And now? Margaret asked. Now we're family. Elizabeth has 4 parents who adore her, and she's growing up knowing that love and kindness are the most powerful forces in the world. She's going to change the world someday, James predicted. She already has, Annie replied. She changed ours. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Rebecca understood that their story wasn't really about finding a baby in a dumpster. It was about choosing to act with kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. It was about a family who chose to share their blessings instead of just counting them. It was about a community that learned to value every member. Most importantly, it was about love, the kind of love that expands to include everyone who needs it, creating families where none existed before. Elizabeth stirred in her sleep inside the house, dreaming of helping people and making wishes come true, surrounded by the love of 4 adults whose lives had been forever changed by one small act of courage on a cold November night. Could one act of kindness really transform an entire community? This incredible true story proves that when we choose love over fear, miracles happen. What act of kindness will you choose today? Subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your kindness might be someone else's miracle.